The Russians might have been satisfied. It was not likely that they would return soon to the charge. However, the transactions of the 5th had convinced me of the necessity of different measures, which I was unwilling to take. They had only succeeded in penetrating as far as the foot of Bischofsburg, where Colonel Figuier was keeping a strict lookout by the protection of an old convent of Capuchins. This neighborhood was too dangerous. I caused the old edifice to be pulled down. Some houses in several villages, and particularly in Scotland, were fortified. We had retaken this place, but with great difficulty. The resistance had been so great that it was at one time a question whether we should not burn it. I rejected this cruel expedient. I could not make up my mind to ruin inhabitants who had already suffered so much during the first siege. I thought it more honorable to drive off the Russians at the point of the bayonet, and I succeeded, but I did not like to run this perilous risk again. In the meantime, the epidemic was far from subsiding. It appeared, on the contrary, to gather fresh strength every day. 6,000 men had already perished. 18,000 men were lying inanimate in the hospitals. General Franceschi, whom death had spared so many times on the field of battle, had just expired. Every hour, every minute, increased our losses and carried off our most valiant soldiers. Substantial food would have saved them, but our provisions were coming to an end. We had no longer any quantity of animal food or cattle. Straw even was wanting for the beds of our sick. I resolved on seeking some remedy for evils which so many brave men were enduring. The attempt was dangerous, but they well deserved that I should expose myself to some dangers in order to relieve them. For a long time I had purposed sending an expedition against Quadendorf, where it was supposed there were abundant resources. I had hitherto deferred it because the troops which were at my disposal appeared to me insufficient, but necessity spoke more forcibly than all these considerations. I hesitated no longer. General de Villiers crowned the heights of Wonneberg and of Pitzendorf, his right supported on Ziegangenberg, and the left by the brigade of General Husson. He commenced without delay an alternate fire of artillery and musketry. While the enemy returned this harmless fire as well as they could, General Houdelet debouched by the valley of Matzlau and got possession of the post charged with its defense. General Bachelou marched in front. 1,200 men and 6 pieces of cannon, under the command of General Golt, were advancing in the second line and formed the reserve. 500 Russians wished to prevent our entrance into Borgfeld. They were trampled underfoot. All who escaped the bayonet perished by the edge of the saber. All were put to death. The enemy came up with their masses and were not more successful. Overpowered, broken before they were in a state of defense, they found safety only in flight. They were not allowed time to place their artillery in battery. Pursued without intermission, they were obliged to leave the field without firing a single round. The Poles were irresistible. Chiefs and soldiers all rushed on the Russians with a determination and boldness of which there is no example. A drummer, the brave Matuzalik, knocked down one of the enemy with his drumsticks and compelled him to surrender. While we drove them before us, General Houdelet threatened their rear. As soon as the enemy perceived this movement, it was no longer a flight. It was disorder, confusion, of which it is difficult to form an idea. They deserted their wounded and their hospitals. They evacuated, with all speed, Schweizkopf and St. Albrecht, and did not halt till they reached the other side of Proust, which our voltigeurs entered pell-mell with them. On arriving at St. Albrecht, I learned that the Russians were still maintaining their ground on the banks of the Motlaw. I made arrangements to prevent their receiving any relief while we attacked them. Major Sifferlitz, with a battalion of the 13th Bavarian, assisted by a company of Westphalians and the flotilla, was charged with this attack. It took place with perfect concert and great impetuosity. 300 Russians were laid in the dust with their chief, who had fallen under the blows of the brave Zarlimsky. The remainder were drowned or taken. 100 of them were escaping through the inundation when they were overtaken by Lieutenant Faber, who charged them at the head of some brave troops, up to the neck in water, and brought them back. A mere boy, young Kern, animated our soldiers. He went before them, excited them. He threw himself into the thickest of the fight. His comrades paused and hesitated to follow him. He turned to them with the boldness which courage inspires. "Forward, Bavarians!" he exclaimed, and they were carried away by his impulse. The day was drawing to a close. The Russians displayed such large numbers of troops in front of Quadendorf that I did not judge it right to continue the attack. We returned to Danzig after having caused the enemy an immense loss and having taken from them 350 men. This was almost the only result of so brilliant a sally. Scarcely did it procure us 100 head of cattle. We had been anticipated. All that the villages had contained had been removed to the rear. Independently of the attempt to procure provisions, I had another object in view, which did not succeed better. Since the commencement of the blockade, I had no channel of communication with the French army. I was not aware of its force or of its fortune. I had put every means in operation in order to get some information on these points, but the hatred was so general and so rooted, no bribery had been able to overcome it. I hoped that the burgomasters would be more tractable, but they knew nothing but the reports that were circulated by the Russians. I remained in a state of the most complete ignorance of everything that was going on around me. After all, whatever might be the course of events, the place was to be defended, and defended to the very last moment. That is to say, we had to live as long as possible with the resources that we still possessed. I redoubled my economy, and, as something is generally gained by an interchange of ideas, I formed a commission which was exclusively charged with the care of the provisions. Count Austerlitz was the president. It was of very great service. It applied itself in a particular manner to ameliorate the condition of the hospitals. It made purchases of linen, of medicines, and substituted for butter, which was no longer to be procured, gelatine. All the wine and fresh meat we had was reserved for the sick. And in order that they might not fail us, the commission seized, after a valuation on both sides, the cellars and the cattle which were found in the place. The troops no longer received any animal food, but the flesh of horses, which had been obtained in the same way. But all the cares of the commission could not subdue the epidemic. It might be said that this cruel pest was inflamed in proportion to the opposition it met. Continually more violent, more irremediable, it burst forth with fresh strength in those places that it had already attacked and assailed those that had before escaped. Weichselmunde and Neufahrwasser, previously free from its attacks, now became a prey to its ravages. The troops, the population, from one extremity of our lines to the other, struggled in the agonies of a cruel disease. Those who escaped and those who fell equally deserved pity. Given up to all the convulsions of delirium, they wept, they groaned, they dwelt on the remembrance of their battles and their pleasures, which no longer existed but in their dreams. Now calm, now furious, they called on their country, their parents, the friends of their childhood. They prayed for, they shuddered at, the destiny of the brave men who had perished. Torn alternately by contrary passions, they breathed out the remnant of life in the horrors of despair. The more remedies were lavished, the more the sufferings increased. The evil spread by means of those very efforts which were used to destroy it. Every day of the last fortnight of March carried off more than 200 men. The epidemic gradually ceased to be so destructive, but it was not till the end of May that it was subdued altogether. It had by that time swept away 5,500 inhabitants and 12,000 brave soldiers. Among this number was General Gault, an excellent officer, a soldier full of courage. He deserved a better lot. Disease was making war on us for the benefit of the Russians, while they themselves disturbed us but very little. The expedition of Borgfeld had cooled their courage. They made entrenchments. They fortified themselves. They were only engaged in defensive measures. Nevertheless, as it was absolutely necessary to give some signs of life, they every now and then endeavored to surprise my advanced posts. Annoyed by these insignificant attacks, I wished in return to break their slumbers as they were breaking ours. They had above Brentau a signal which furnished me with the means. Our business was to burn it. I entrusted the management of it to 2 officers, whose intelligence and courage I had experienced. They were the chiefs of Battalion Zembec and Potoki. On a dark night they went forth from Langfurt, and marched for a long time without being perceived. Discharges of musketry at length apprised them that they were discovered. They immediately rushed on, and overthrew the enemy. Potoki advanced towards Brentau, and dispersed a numerous body of infantry which opposed his passage. 40 men threw themselves into a kind of blockhouse. A voltigeur followed them and summoned them to surrender. He was killed. The Poles, quite furious, immediately inundated the redoubt and exterminated all the Russians that it contained. Whilst these things were going on in the village, Zembec made himself master of the signal. He set fire to it and immediately descended into the plain, overthrew and cut to pieces the detachments which he found in his way, and pushed on as far as the walls of Oliva, where he threw some shells. At the same time, the brave de Villaine, quartermaster to the 8th, swept, with a dozen hussars, all that part of our advanced posts. He charged with so much boldness that the Cossacks were terrified and broken. Success encouraged him. He extended himself to the right, reconnoitred, searched the wood, and did not join our troops till the moment they were retiring. Meanwhile, all the signals were on fire. The Russian army ran to arms and expected every moment to see itself attacked. It passed in this state the rest of the night and the whole of the next day. We repaid them in a mass the alarms which they had given us in detail. The political horizon became every day more cloudy. Prussia had thrown aside the mask. She made war against us by insurrection. This event could not be hidden from the soldiers. The Russians had too great an interest in informing them of it. I consequently threw no obstacle in the way of its being made known. Immediately, attempts to seduce the soldiers again began to be resorted to. The enemy thought that the confidence and attachment of our troops were shaken. The disproportion between the means of attack and defense, money, promises, everything was brought into play to engage them to desert. A bounty was offered as a recompense for shame. I was justified in offering one as a reward for fidelity. I promised a reward of 200 francs to anyone who should deliver up a man convicted of seducing our soldiers. This measure had its effect. Most of the emissaries that the besiegers had in the place were pointed out to me. According to our laws, they had incurred the pain of death, but men in general are less wicked than unfortunate. Nearly all of them were fathers of families who had yielded to necessity. I delivered them up to the derision of the soldiers. I ordered their heads to be shaved and dismissed them. This device kept them at home. I was freed from them without having recourse to executions. The garrison appeared very little disturbed by the increase which it had learned the enemy had received. Nevertheless, I wished it to judge of itself what it was still capable of. It was near Easter. The weather was mild, the sky clear. I appointed a review. It took place in the face of the army, which was besieging us. At daybreak, the inhabitants, the sick even, occupied the heights of Langfurt. They spread themselves on the glacis and avenues, and crowned all the ascents from the plain which separates Stries from Oliva. The troops were not long before they appeared. 7,000 men, followed by a numerous artillery, all in magnificent condition, successively ranged themselves in order of battle. They maneuvered, they defiled, with unparalleled precision. The Russians, astonished at so much boldness, did not venture to trouble us. They, also ranged in order of battle, were spectators of our movements, without throwing any obstacle in the way. It would have been, however, a fine opportunity for them. Not a piece was loaded. I had particularly prohibited the use of cartridge. The bayonet alone was to punish them, if they were rash enough to give the slightest insult. This measure was, perhaps, rather a bold one, but it was necessary to exalt the courage of the soldier and to convince him of the contempt that the boasting of foreigners deserved. After parading, the question was how we should subsist. This was much less easy. The enemy had rifled all the villages and had left neither forage nor cattle. No more resources were to be had unless we sought them at the distance of several leagues. I had gained experience at Borgfeld, and I acted accordingly. I had obtained exact information on the facilities and the obstacles which an expedition into the Nahung presented. I knew the number, the position of the troops, and their complete security. I made my arrangements. 1,200 chosen men, 350 horse, a company of light artillery with 8 pieces of cannon, commanded by General Bachelou, advanced towards Hubude. The enemy, driven in, endeavored in vain to defend Bonsac. Bachelou does not give him time to recollect himself, charges him, routs him, and drives him back in confusion as far as Waldon. The enemy's principal forces occupy this village. Nearly 5,000 men receive him and support him, but, always carried forward by the same impetuosity, our troops come up running and prevent him from deploying. They presently commence the attack. A part of them spread as sharpshooters over the downs and the plain, the rest remain in line and commence a destructive fire. Our artillery, our cavalry, come up and complete the defeat. It was so prompt and so decided that the artillery did not attempt to fire a single round. It escaped with all speed from the field of battle. A column of Lithuanians ventured to stem the torrent. Colonel Farin rushed on it with his dragoons and compelled it to lay down its arms. The reserve was still untouched. The brave Ridoux marches towards them. He watches them, seizes the moment when they are retiring, charges them, and takes them prisoners. At the same time, Captain Neumann goes in pursuit of the fugitives, flies from left to right, scatters confusion in all directions, and with a handful of soldiers gathers up some hundreds of the Allied troops, whom he obliges to surrender. This advantage cost him 2 wounds. The sub-lieutenant Schneider was still more hurt and alone received 12 lance wounds. I had myself followed the movement of General Bachelou. I advanced as far as Waldon, but the Russians were flying in such disorder that it appeared to me useless to follow them any farther. The troops that had defeated them were quite sufficient to pursue them. As soon as I learnt that they had driven them back more than 12 leagues, I stopped their march. They fixed their quarters and employed themselves in taking away the forage and cattle that we found in the places that we had got possession of. The reserve that I had with me was useless, owing to the promptitude and dexterity with which General Bachelou had conducted this expedition. I ordered it to cross the Vistula. It landed in front of the fortress of La Costa and marched towards the dike, which the enemy still occupied. At the same time, the gunboats came up the river and commenced the attack. The Russians soon gave way and dispersed. We extended ourselves without any obstacle over the whole extent of the Werder. We remained 4 days in these different positions. General Bachelou, on the right bank of the river, rifled that part of Nahung that he had taken, whilst with the aid of our boats, we drew, from the left side, all the resources that we could get, 500 head of horned cattle, 400 head of sheep, 1,200 quintals of hay, 800 of straw, and 2,300 decaliters of oats were the result of this expedition. The enemy tried to intercept our convoys, but the composure and dexterity of Lieutenant Hoekinski and of the Commissary Belisal triumphed over all obstacles. The attacks of the Russians even turned to our advantage and brought us 100 head of oxen, which the intrepid Brelinski took from them after having defeated them. The army employed in the siege did not attempt to disturb us. Immovable in its lines, it only appeared occupied with the demonstrations our troops were making on the side of Langfort and New Scotland. Its uneasiness was so great that the noise of a heavy shower of rain was mistaken for our advance. It thought itself attacked, set on fire its signals on the left, and spread alarm as far as Pitzendorf. We had revictualled our hospitals, but our own situation was not changed. 2 ounces of horseflesh and 1 ounce of salt beef still formed our daily ration. As soon as I was out of one difficulty, I fell into another. I had procured some provisions, but the military chest was exhausted. It had not been able to meet the expense of paying for the provisions we had carried off. I was obliged to issue bills payable on the raising of the blockade. Nevertheless, it was necessary to secure the pay of the soldiers to cover the expenses of the artillery and the engineer department, without which the place would fall of itself. To what expedient, what means to have recourse in this extremity? There was but one. I was unwilling to adopt it, but everything gave way to necessity. I demanded a loan of 3 million from the inhabitants. The inhabitants of Danzig were indignant at this measure. They complained, murmured, and threatened some commotion. The enemy became more pressing. The fleet, the land forces, all assumed a more hostile attitude. It was at this conjuncture that Baron Servien, condemned to death for decoying soldiers, accused the Senator Pigelow of being at the head of a conspiracy formed in the interest of Russia. The reputation of this magistrate was untarnished, but the charges were so detailed, so precise, and the consequences of imprudent security so serious, that I ordered him to be arrested. His innocence was soon established. I had for a short time doubted the honesty of this respectable man. It was my duty to make him an acknowledgment. I made it in the way which appeared to me best fitted to calm the impression of this unpleasant adventure. The citizens had remained quiet, and the frequent skirmishes, which had appeared to me suspicious, were owing to the increase of troops which had arrived before the fortress. The Duke of Württemberg had just taken the command of it. More enterprising, more restless than General Levis, he did not allow my advanced posts breathing time. If he failed in one point, he tried another. Driven back at Langfurt, put to flight at Ziegangenberg, he threw himself on Ora. As badly received in that position as in the former ones, he did not the less return to the charge. He attacked at one time Stolzenberg, Schidlitz, and the post of the barrier. Defeated at all these points, he tried again and again was defeated. No check discouraged him. He tried a last effort. He rushed during the night on my troops, who were refreshing themselves after their fatigues, and took some houses, which he set fire to. But, at the sight of the 2 battalions which ran to arms, he was alarmed and retreated. The patrols and sentinels were continually engaged. These combats, in which individual courage is put most to the test, were all to our advantage. The Cossacks did not shine at all in them. 3 of them combined for the purpose of overpowering a dragoon of the 12th, called Drooms. This brave fellow waited for them with firmness. Knocked down by a blow from a lance, he rose, seized the end of the weapon, drew his adversary to him, and laid him dead on the spot. Heke, another dragoon of the same regiment, resisted 4 of these barbarians. Although wounded, he knocked down one, killed another, and put the rest to flight. I could cite 1,000 traits of the same kind. These continual attacks harassed my soldiers. I could not suffer them to be insulted by the Cossacks. We took arms. General Grandjean commanded the right, General de Villiers the center, and the left was under the direction of Count Houdelet. The unexpected appearance of our columns froze the enemy with dread. Their horses were grazing freely on the plain. Their infantry was at rest in the camps. They did not expect this attack. At the moment we were beginning to move, I received the authentic news of the immortal victories of Lutzen and Bautzen. I communicated it, I proclaimed it, I spread it abroad. Joy, intoxication, enthusiasm were at their height. All these sentiments were shown at once. Our troops were impatient for the fight. They burned to conquer. From left to right, the cry of "Forward!" was re-echoed. The signal was given. Immediately, the artillery was unmasked. The troops approached the enemy, the combat began, and the ground was covered with heaps of dead. Captain Preutin poured his fire upon the enemy and forced them to evacuate Schönfeld. The Polish horse artillery came up at a gallop, placed itself within half gunshot distance, and overthrew everything in its way. Major Belencourt and the chief of Battalion Duprat pressed on and bore down the fugitives. They dispersed them as often as they rallied. Defeated at the center, the enemy threw themselves on our left and threatened Ora. Major Schneider opposed a stout resistance. This excellent officer defended himself at one point while he attacked at another, and made up by his courage for the insufficiency of the means at his disposal. Generals Brissot and Husson ran to his assistance. The Russians, overpowered, could not stem the torrent. They were put to flight and did not stop until they reached the heights behind Wonneburg. They soon changed their plan and rushed on our right wing, which received them with admirable firmness. Colonel Denglofstein, Major Horodam, and Lieutenant Colonel Hope emulated one another in exertions. Sergeants Vigneault and Auger also set an example of courage. I rushed to the midst of this bloody contest. I ordered the Poles of the 10th to advance, with 5 pieces of cannon which were in reserve. The combat grew warmer and became more and more terrible. The Russians at last gave way and escaped in confusion from the camp of Pitzkendorf. I did not think it right to pursue them. Sufficient for the day are the evils thereof. They had about 1,800 men put out of action. I caused the firing to cease. On our side, we reckoned 400 killed or wounded. The Allies, conquered in 2 consecutive battles, had solicited an armistice. The war had been carried back to the Oder. We were once more the arbiters of fortune. Our glory was so much the more pure, as it was entirely the result of that impetuous courage which supplies the want of experience and does not give way before any obstacle. Mere recruits had triumphed over the combined forces of Prussia and Russia. Captain Planat brought us the news of it at the moment when the defeated besiegers were seeking safety in flight. Napoleon had added to his dispatches proofs of his munificence. He condescended to grant me the ribbon of the Order of La Réunion. He authorized me to make promotions, to confer marks of honor, and to point out the superior officers that I thought fit for advancement. His victories had exalted the courage of the troops. The soldiers once more swore by his genius. They saw him again triumphing on the banks of the Vistula. His dispatch was conceived in the following terms. Monsieur le Comte Rapp, the Major General acquaints you with the situation of affairs. I hope that peace will be concluded in the course of the year, but if my expectations are disappointed, I shall come to raise your blockade. Our armies have never been more numerous or in a finer condition. You will see by the journals all the measures which I have taken, and which have secured me 1,200,000 men under arms and 100,000 horse. My relations with Denmark are very amicable, where Baron Alquier still continues my minister. I need not recommend you to be deaf to all insinuations, and at all events to keep the important fortress which I have confided to you. Inform me by the return of the officer what soldiers have most distinguished themselves. The promotion and the decoration which you shall think they have deserved, you may consider as conferred. And you may bestow decorations of the Legion of Honor to the number of 10 crosses of officers and 100 of knights. Make choice of the men that have rendered the most important services, and send me the list by return of the officer, in order that the Chancellor of the Legion of Honor may be instructed of the appointments. You may also fill up in your ranks all the vacant appointments, as far as the rank of captain inclusive. Send also an account of these promotions. On this I pray God, etc. Napoleon. Newmark, June 5th, 1813. That concludes the 13th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more episodes and leave a comment.